Welcome to Adorama Voice, a voice for creators. I'm your host, Daniel Norton. In this episode, we're going to talk about getting past that fear in order to create what we truly want to create. I've talked a little bit in the past about how we as artists sometimes don't say the things that we want to say or need to say that are in us for whatever reason, and kind of encouraged us to do it, right? But I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, about why we might not do it, and kind of centering around the idea of being uncomfortable. So when we are artists or creators and we have something we want to say, it is always a risk. There's a risk that basically people won't like it, or it won't do as well as other things we've done. And we've got to weigh that, I guess, against how much we really need to say it. And sometimes we really need to say it. And in the end, if we don't, it will be something we regret. You know, mediocrity or going towards the center or the average is fine and will do you well, I guess, to maintain a steady business or a steady flow of likes on the very social media. But if you really want to take your work to the next level, to have people look at your work and really have it stand out, you've got to actually express what is you, because you are the one thing in the world that is completely and totally unique. You emulate other artists, you get inspired by other artists, there's other things going on around you. Your take is going to be your own. And unless obviously you're completely and totally copying, which is a different thing. But if you are in fact creating on your own, no matter how much inspiration comes from other places, it's still got that little bit of you in it, which makes it your own and makes it unique. Being uncomfortable is part of being an artist, or at least part of growing as an artist. Comfort is kind of the enemy of the artist. It is the thing that makes us feel like, oh, we're on a track, it's doing well, we're getting our likes, we're getting steady business. And it's a false sense of security, because art is always changing and evolving. And eventually, what you do now that is the norm will go out of flavor, out of style. And if you're not constantly growing and changing, so will you. And this is a fear that we have as artists. We fear that if we change, the people that are following us now will move on. If we don't change, then eventually everybody will move on. You know, it's like the idea of being a classic rock artist, let's say, and you're still playing songs from 40 years ago. If you are not also creating new work, what you end up with is, I think, my opinion would be that it's going to be not as exciting. When you went to that show 40 years ago, when the song was new and you were excited about it, you were playing it. When you're up there now, you're just kind of doing lip service. I mean, maybe if you took a long break from it or something. I've noticed some artists do that, right? They have huge, of course, that's because they're always growing. They'll have huge repertoires and then they'll pull out something old and give a new life to it. So I'm not saying you should throw away the old, obviously, but we want to be moving forward. We want to step out there. We want to get to the point where we start to feel uncomfortable. And that's when we know that we're really starting to show what's inside of us. And we're starting to have that little bit of creeping fear. That's when you know you're onto something. So the author Neil Gaiman, in his University of the Arts commencement speech, said, "The moment that you feel that just possibly you're walking down the street naked, exposing too much of your heart and your mind and what exists on the inside, showing too much of yourself, that's the moment that you may be starting to get it right." And I 100% agree with this. If you produce work that you don't feel a little bit nervous to show, a little bit nervous that people won't like it, not because you want to get likes and you have this ego, but because this is something that's truly part of you. And the liking and not liking of this work really represents what you do. Now, I've talked about before that you want people to not like your work, right? I always say that's a good sign that you're doing well and being unique. And that's also true. But that doesn't mean that we're happy with it, right? We don't want to have people not want to like our work. We're hoping that whatever we produce will be universal because we're feeling it, right? So we're thinking, well, we feel this way. We have these emotions. We have these ideas. So maybe everybody does, or maybe they've got it down deep and they just don't know. And once we show them, they'll be able to bring it out. But the fact of the matter is not everybody feels the same. And that's totally okay. One thing we want to really think about is, why is it that we want to show our inner thoughts and beliefs as art? Why are we expressing ourselves this way? This will help us deal with both the success and the disappointment or the failures, because we can see if we're moving towards what we want. If we're creating something that is shocking to show people and reveal to the world that something's going on, to make a change, that's not always going to be comfortable, especially for the people that are content with what's going on. If you are pushing to make change or showing people something that they don't normally look at, it's going to be uncomfortable for them. And it's going to make them, a lot of them, not like it and deny what's going on. And thus the rejection of your work is a positive. If you're showing that some kind of industry, for instance, is hurting the environment and you are documenting the lives of people that are affected by it, if the people that make lots and lots of money by doing that industry don't like the work, that's good. That means you're going in the right direction. That's probably a big wide scope, but you understand what I mean. One thing we don't want to disregard, though, is the idea of finding ourselves in others. This is where your inspiration / emulation comes from. Do people say slash when they talk? This is where your inspiration and emulation come from. It's where you start, right? Because sometimes it's hard for us to move forward. We look at the blank canvas and we think to ourselves, there's something in me, right? There's words or music or images or something inside of me. I got to get it up and I just don't know how to do it. And when we see somebody who's doing something similar that we can connect to, it's great to look at them for inspiration and even emulate their process. At a certain point, though, you want that emulation to succeed it, right? They say the student outdoing the master. That's really what you want. You want to look at somebody's work and use it as a starting point so that you can create work that's even more potent, even more powerful because it's yours. So this emulation and inspiration should just be a place to get you going. It shouldn't be something you fall back on, especially when you're just looking at technique, certain brush strokes, certain chords, certain filters on your photography. What we want to do is look at something, see how they approached the project or the art, and then add that to our repertoire so that we can approach our projects and art with a direction. Okay, so what happens when people don't like what we say or the topics which we cover? Basically, rejection. How do we deal with that? Well, first of all, I would say that, like I mentioned earlier, I would think about why they're rejecting your position or your art or not liking it. Is it because the shocking nature of it or the truthfulness of it hurts a stability, right, that they have? And if so, again, that's probably a good thing. If, though, you are creating work that is supposed to uplift, let's say, a certain community or certain area of the world or whatever, and they're not accepting it, we will have to wonder, well, why? What is it that's not working? Maybe you are approaching it without the right point of view. You're looking at it from the outside, which can be good, but maybe those on the inside look at it as your attempts as shallow, kind of surface level. And if that's the case, we need to dig in and do a little bit more immersion or research into this area. We talked about this a little bit before too. If you create something because you want to showcase a certain cultural field that you love, you go on a trip somewhere, you see this beautiful artwork, you want to create something like that, but then the people in that culture look at it and go, oh, really? Then you know that there's something you're missing there. Maybe the surface level things, the color, the composition isn't really the full story there, and we need to look at it again and reevaluate. So sometimes it's our approach to the work that they're rejecting, not necessarily the work itself, although obviously the work itself is being rejected, but it's more because of the approach that we took. We're not immersing ourselves in the situation to bring forth the emotion. We are surface level grabbing ideas and inspiration and then turning it into something else that maybe isn't true to the original source in a way that might even be offensive. The other thing we want to take in consideration is, are people rejecting your work because of you? Because of your personality, because of the way that you approach it? This is a very real thing, especially in the world of commercial and art. If you are producing excellent work, but nobody wants to work with you because you are a jerk on the set, basically, or too full of yourself or too demanding, what will end up happening is your work that would be good, would be interesting, is now being shelved or hit the cutting room floor because nobody wants to work with you because you're not nice to work with. And it's one thing to be passionate and push forward and have drive. It's another thing to be a jerk. So we want to consider that maybe some of the reasons why we're not having success is because of our personality, the way that we put ourselves out in the world, the language we use, the way we present ourselves. Because in certain areas, you're going to want to, and I'm not saying you need to change, you should be you. If you are trying to bridge cultural divides, you have to consider at least the other side. Otherwise, it'll be tricky to get there, right? We want to at least look to see what's going on there and make a decision. First of all, is it worth it for us? Do we care enough about it? And can we tone down, shift, and use a different approach? Because none of us are a singular thing. Everyone has different ways of doing things. You can be aggressive some days. You can be gentle another day. Everybody has that in them. And you just have to use the side of you that's most appropriate to work for that kind of art or creation in order to bring it forward. In order to bring it forward so that people will accept it. So sometimes it's not the work, it's you. And there is this whole idea of like pleasing yourself and being self-satisfied. You got to be your own biggest fan, this whole thing. And that's not untrue. I think that you want to do things for yourself, for your gratification. But I also, going back to the beginning of why are we doing things? Are you only doing it for your own gratification? And if so, then why are you showing it or trying to get it shown in galleries or Instagram or whatever? If it's really just truly for you, it's probably not. If you're out there trying to get likes and you're upset that nobody's liking your work, then you're not just doing it for yourself. You're doing it for other people, which means you need to consider that in your approach. There's many different ways to approach things and many different ways to say the thing you want to say. You should be able to, in most cases, express yourself and get a point out, even if it's controversial, in a way that at least some people will be willing to listen. One of the things that I find with many artists is that they will get to the point where they're going to finally break through. They're just getting there. They're starting to bring themselves into their work, and then they retreat back. Again, it comes down to this fear. We're afraid that the truest of ourselves will be rejected. And my advice there is, it's like pulling off a Band-Aid. Soak it in water. No, what you want to do is rip it off quickly, right? It doesn't prolong the pain. Doesn't usually work. If you are going to do it, you should just do it. You've got something to say, just say it. Get it out there in a way that you think people will be the most receptive to, but that's also true to you. And don't poke at it, move back, and poke at it and move back to see if maybe they like it. Or if they don't, I won't do it. If maybe they like it. Because when you do that, what you end up with is never truly being yourself. You end up being what you think people want from you. And that will never really be pure. All that being said, and I say this every once in a while, and I think it's important, is that sometimes when we're creators, we don't necessarily have anything to say per se. Sometimes you're just creating art or music or illustrations for the point of the beauty of it. And that is also okay. If you create something just because it's beautiful and it inspires you and you hope people see beauty in it, that's 100% fine. And many people do that. But I think that most of us that would consider ourselves creators do have something to say, at least some of the time. So we want to make sure that we're able to say the things we want to. And if we don't have something to say, we don't need to force it either. You don't need to think, well, I really believe in this cause, so every picture I take, every movie I make, every drawing I do is going to be about this cause. We have many facets as artists. Sometimes you just want to look at a beautiful sunset. Other times you want to fight the power, so to speak. So you got to kind of balance those things out and decide what's right for you. Don't feel like you always have to have something to say. So keep in mind that when you are creating, you should have a bit of an uncomfortable feeling about revealing that work to your audience. And if you do, then you know that you're really starting to pull deep down inside of you what is truly you, the personal. And that personal is going to be the strongest word you could make. Adorama supports this podcast, and you can support them by going to adorama.com and picking up all of your photo, video, audio, and computer needs. Also check out adorama.com/create no matter what for all the great contests. One of the best ways to help a small podcast like this one grow is to rate and review it. So if you haven't done so already, please jump onto your podcaster and give me a rating. Also, submit a review, and I read one every week. And here's one from Lost in Japan Now via Apple Podcasts Japan. Great show. 5 stars. Great show for aspiring or experienced photographers. Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm trying to talk on a level that's more open to all artists here so that we don't feel like this is only for a certain level, right? If you're just starting or you've been working in the industry for a long time, the idea of why we create, how we create, staying fresh is something that will always be useful. And that's what I'm trying to create here, I guess what they call evergreen type topics. Techniques come and go, but the philosophy of being an artist will always exist. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to have your voice as part of the show, you can send me a message using the Anchor app. There's a link in the description. Also, you could send me an email, adoramavoice@gmail.com. You could either just write out an email or you could record a voice message and send it to me that way. Also, I would love it if you share this podcast around on any of the social media you might be on. Let's get in front of more people, get this community growing more, and keep the conversation going. I'll talk to you soon.